You're listening to Always Player One, a solo board gaming podcast.
Hello and welcome to Always Player One. I'm Scruffy.
And I'm Norm.
And today we're talking about Orchard 9-card solitaire game. We also have a special guest, Dan, who our Discord users will know as Octavo.
Brilliant. Well, before we begin, I'd like to just have a quick moment to talk about the Discord again. We've been getting a lot of enjoyment out of the Discord, and a slight correction on the last episode. Last episode I said you would need to ask us for an invitation. Silly me, I've recently found out how I can come up with an invitation that doesn't expire. So if you'd like to join the Discord, simply click the link in the description. But Scruffy, that's been something that's been a lot of fun over the last few weeks, hasn't it?
That's right. It's a really cool place to hang out. Like it's nice just to see it every day. It's got a kind of life of its own now, not just about solo board games, which obviously is the main kind of focus of the thing, but other stuff as well. You know, people are always throwing different things out there and chatting about different stuff. And it's really fun and interesting. Lots of really nice people, cool topics. Yeah, there's also some stuff with the playtest corners really kicking off, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So we have a channel on the Discord that we call Playtest Corner, and we ask designers to invite our Discord users to volunteer to help them playtest their games, and that's just starting to kick off now. We have a few people already signed up to help playtest the game, which is really awesome to see that this has all come about because of the community around the podcast. So it's been a lot of fun to communicate with you guys, and a lot of you guys write in and aren't on Discord. It'd be really cool if you jump on there. No obligation, but yeah, it's so much fun. So we'd love to see you there.
And just another quick note, this episode is kind of inspired just by a discussion we were having on Discord, asking people what sort of games they play and stuff, and somebody threw out the Orchard game, and it's a cool print and play. You should try it out. So yeah, it's a great place to give us a bit of feedback and let us know what to cover in our episodes.
Brilliant. Scruffy, would you like to tell us about Orchard?
So I'm going to give a quick overview of the game then. So Orchard is a solo print and play game revolving around a deck of 18 cards. Each card has 6 trees on with different fruits, 2 apples, 2 pears, and 2 plum trees. The configuration of these trees is different on every card. At the start of the game, you separate out 9 cards to form a deck and set the other 9 cards to one side. Then you flip 1 card face up from the deck and draw 2 cards for your hand. On your turn, you simply play a card, then draw a card. The card must be played so that it overlaps part of a card or multiple cards already on the table. The card can be rotated however you like, but the fruit trees must match with those being overlapped. And when they do, a dice is placed on each matching tree and set to 1. If this tree is overlapped again, then the dice is increased to a 3, then a 6, then a 10, a bumper crop. These numbers represent your score at the end of the game. You are able to overlap cards with trees that don't match for up to 2 trees during the game, on separate turns or on the same turn. If you do, however, the fruit for that tree rots, any dice are removed, and a rot token is placed there instead. You can no longer place cards to overlap on the rotten tree. The game ends either when you run out of cards in the deck or if there are no more legal moves. Then you add up all the values on the dice to get your final score. The rulebook indicates benchmarks for your score ranging from paltry to almost impossible. Once finished, you can jump right into another game with the deck set aside during setup. There we go. That's a quick overview of Orchard.
As always, you've nailed it. Yeah, couldn't have done a better job.
I just love that little thing at the end of the game. You look at the score, and it's all tree puns, all fruit puns. They're fantastic.
Well, without any further ado, should we introduce our special guests for this episode?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. So joining us is Dan, as Scruffy already said. You know him in Discord as Octavo. Dan, for our listeners who aren't aware of who you are, would you mind telling them how you got into games, what kind of games you enjoy, and what you do in the gaming industry.
Hello. Yes, sure. So I got into games many years ago. I can't quite remember how many years, but I first got into, I suppose, what people would be calling proper gaming when I got a copy of Ankh-Morpork for my birthday from my parents. So that was the first proper game that wasn't Monopoly or Cluedo or any of those sort of games, which everyone loves to hate.
And that's the Terry Pratchett Discworld one. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. A massive Discworld fan and Terry Pratchett fan in general. So it was quite the good birthday present, I must admit. So from then on, I received a couple of more games for Christmases and birthdays. One of the main ones I play or have played in the past was Pandemic, which, Norm, I know you're also a fan on.
Mm-hmm.
And then from then, I found like-minded people at my place of work. My collection grew as I learned more about the detail of our hobby, such as the cursed words of Ameritrash and Euros. But after playing a number of games and getting back on track, my preferences tend to be worker placement and games that involved some form of player interaction, be it direct or indirect. I also quite like dexterity games and small footprint games. So Orchard fits that one a peach, if you pardon the pun.
Very good.
In terms of what I do in the industry, I actually help a company called Dragon Dawn Productions in sort of a jack of all trades role. It's quite an interesting company because it's basically just people who volunteer their time in editing rule books or doing a bit of game design, play testing, whatever kind of needs doing on their projects at the time, which is quite interesting because there's basically an international group of like-minded people attempting to put games out that people like.
Excellent. Are you working on any projects at the moment that you can talk about?
Yeah, working on a couple. The main one, which I've been working on for a while, is Singularity Sky, which is actually a redo of one of their previous games, Phantom League. Phantom League was based off the computer game Elite Dangerous, for those that do know video games.
Oh, yeah.
And Singularity Sky is actually a book by an author called Charles Stross. So it's basically a combination of those two things, which I hope will do really well and should be in Kickstarter next year sometime.
Awesome. And that's a multiplayer game, is it?
Yeah, so it will be a multiplayer game of basically trade, exploration. It's a sandbox game, so you can pretty much do what you like. And it will hopefully have a solo mode. So one for you guys, hopefully.
I'm glad you said that, because otherwise you'd have had to cut a lot of that out.
Yeah, other than that, there's a game coming in a couple of weeks, which is Factory 42, which is sort of a worker placement, resource management, negotiation game in Dwarven bureaucratic society, which does not have a solo mode, so you can cut that one if you like.
Brilliant.
Oh, wow. More games with dwarves. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Right up my alley. So let's go ahead and talk about Orchard. Dan, as you're the guest of honor, why don't you kick us off with your kind of initial impressions of Orchard?
I thought it was great. There you go. You can put that in the papers. It's for what is essentially 9 cards and a bunch of dice. It is an incredibly deep game, I would say, if not mildly infuriating.
I'll definitely agree with that bit.
Yeah, I've struggled to get higher than a score of 44, and it's killing me, I must admit. But no, for such little material that the print and play gives you, which is by no means a bad thing, there is so much game here that it's kind of hard to describe. I don't know if you guys would agree.
Yeah, certainly, especially the part about the amount of game you get for the amount of components the game comes with. And for a print and play, as you said, Dan, that is definitely a good thing. The first thing I consider when I look at print and plays for this show is how much effort is it going to be for us to physically make the game? Because we don't have to make it, test it, see if we like it before we agree to then put it on the show, you know? And when I saw Orchard has 2 pieces of A4 paper and a third piece of A4 paper if you want to print the rule book, I thought, yeah, that's perfect. Why not give that a spin? And yeah, I'm sure that's exactly what you're doing right now. If you're listening to the show thinking, yeah, I could probably print 3 pieces of paper. Scruffy, what did you think about the depth that this game has to offer?
I've got to say, for me, it didn't feel very deep for me. I mean, I'm really glad that it did for you guys, and I think that perhaps it's a problem with me rather than the game, that I couldn't help but feel just sort of buffeted about by the cards a bit. Like I never really felt in charge of the situation and like I was making strategical or interesting choices. I was always trying to just make the best choice for that thing. And then even though I had another card in my hand, I wasn't really considering how that will play later. And then I draw another card and it doesn't fit, or it does fit, not by my design, but by the game's kind of input, which for me kind of took me out of it a bit. The most fun I had with the game, I have to say, was when I first played it. The first time I played it, I was like, okay, I can see how this might be fun and strategic when I give it a bit more thought. But every other game I played, I got worse. But then going after that, I introduced the game to my partner, who she absolutely loved it. And so watching her play as a non-gamer was for me the most fun I had with the game. But yeah, like I say, probably just a thing with me rather than the game itself. I think it's, I can see that it's got some neat little choices, neat design choices. I really like some of the little nuances, like that you set aside a deck and then you can dive in straight away again. And that the game is so quick, it doesn't engender bad vibes because you're not sat there for ages getting bored. Although both me and my partner said that by the last couple of turns, we were a bit like, oh, I don't know how to, this is the worst bit of the game, the last turn. Did you guys feel the same way as me with that? Like, obviously not liking the game so much, but certainly about the end turns being a little bit fiddly and kind of unpleasant in a weird way.
Before I answer the question, I'm just going to point out that I had a similar experience to you, Scruffy, in that I actually gave it to my dad to play, who is also not a gamer, as we would describe it. But we'd been for Sunday lunch, and his normal state of play is to fall asleep. And what actually happened is that he spent the next 45 minutes thoroughly engrossed in the game.
Wow.
And getting really frustrated that he couldn't get more than 20 points, which was entertaining for quite a few of us, apart from him. But he didn't leave the experience jaded or soured towards the game. But circling back to your question, yes, the last few cards are difficult, I suppose, but then I also relish the challenge. And it is disheartening when you've got your final card and all you can do is just make 1 point. But it's better than no points at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point, Scruffy. The end game kind of makes or breaks your score. That's the crunch time. And sometimes, like you said, Dan, all you can do on your last card is squeeze out one extra point. What I often find is if you're going to score a 10, which is the highest you can score on any one single die, it's not going to be in the first, in my experience anyway, it's not going to be in the first few cards. It's going to be in the last few cards. And the only way you're going to do that is if you have some kind of idea of what patterns you can and can't leave next to each other in order to overlap correctly. For example, not placing 3 of the same color next to each other, because there are no cards that do that. And that only comes with repeated plays. And that's where I think some of the depth comes into it. And I wasn't expecting that. The first time I played, I kind of thought, me and you've kind of had the opposite experience completely, Scruffy. The first time I played, I thought, okay, I like this. It's interesting. But I don't think it's a game I'm going to get better at. It feels too random. I feel too at mercy with the cards. I played it 4 times in a row the first time I played it. And the 4th time I played, I scored my highest score of that session. And each time I scored higher. And it came out of familiarity of the patterns. And also, you kind of have to see the patterns. And once you've played a few times, you kind of flow. You kind of enter this flow state where you can suddenly start to see the patterns light up in front of you. And I think the game really lends itself well to be played multiple times as well, because something Dan said earlier, the way you set up the game is you take these 18 cards, you shuffle them up and you split them into 2 piles. You only use 1 pile for a game, so you're already set up to play for a second time. And one game is 5 to 10 minutes maximum. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, it's very short.
Yeah.
It's very, very short indeed. So, yeah, I think the way you kind of have to start to see the patterns, and that only comes with repeated plays, or at least with me, I get better at seeing how the colours match up once I've played a couple of times. And the fact that the game is designed almost to be played multiple times, I think that just leads to a really, really pleasant experience. And for such a small game, it really isn't much effort to print yourself. I think that's wonderful.
That's really interesting. I don't think I've ever reached that kind of zen state that you're talking about there. I don't feel like like I say, the best score I've got, I've played quite a lot of times now because they're such short games. I actually kind of didn't keep track of how many games I played, but certainly over a dozen, which sounds like a lot, but they are so short that you just whip through them. And maybe it's that I had the wrong sort of mental investment going in, because every game I was consistently getting 1 or 2 points worse. Like, I literally never scored better every game I played, which I think is quite remarkable. I think I maybe drew a few scores, but never improved, always got worse. And the first game I played, I scored something like 44, and it was just basically random playment. I just sort of went, I'll just put that there, whatever, I'll just put that there. And I even tried to kind of recapture that sort of not thinky element. I tried to play really strategically, looking at both cards, looking for the best optimum move every turn. And no matter what I did, I felt like I didn't have an impact on what score I got. Like, it was just the game told me what score I got, and it was predetermined almost. But obviously it's not. And like you're talking about a state of spotting the patterns that I obviously haven't quite managed to nail just yet. How about you, Dan? You can be the tiebreaker for us on that one. Did you get into a sort of trance with it and go into the flow, as Norm calls it?
I wouldn't probably call it a trance, but I do understand when.
Well, I didn't call it a trance either.
Oh, that's right then.
It just makes you think of like Bejeweled on the. If everyone's ever played a video game of Bejeweled, where you go into the trance state and it all gets flashy and flowy. That's what I'm imagining when you talk about the colours.
It's funny you mentioned Bejeweled, because I understand where Norm's coming from, and I would liken it to games like Tetris, or even board game wise, you're talking about Azul, where you're trying to make pieces fit, but also fit in a way that will help you in the future. So obviously you can place this card down and it's great because you've got an apple crop and a plum crop. But what you want to do, as Norm mentioned, is you don't want to have 3 plum trees together, because there is no card that will help you in the future for that. So I do understand where Norm's coming from, and I do feel like there is a flow. And as I play, I mean, I had a game before we started the podcast, which admittedly was not a very good score, but I felt I did better previously, because there was a lot more instances of where I was looking at the card and I was looking at my orchard and I go, actually, that fits perfectly there.
Yeah.
And I find myself doing that more and more. I find it easier to recognize, I could put this here and, I'll only cover up 2 trees. But actually, if I just turn this 90 degrees, I'm covering 5. No, that's impossible with a card. I'm covering 4.
Well, you could go 5 if one bit goes over the edge of the board.
Oh, yeah, true. But there is kind of like but I'm not actively looking, which I suppose is the opposite to your experience, Scruffy. I wasn't actively looking to cover 5 trees. I'm just kind of staring at the card and I'm staring at the orchard. And I suppose in that way, it probably does look like I'm in a trance, because I'm just staring at a piece of paper for ages. But all of a sudden, my brain does the working out, and I go, oh, actually, there you go, great. And that I think is why I enjoy the game so much, because that, whether I score well or not, that feeling of going, oh my god, this card fits perfectly here, is a weird rush.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me sound quite sad, I think. But there is a weird rush of just going, oh my god, this is like the perfect fit.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing that's really funny is that when I was teaching my partner the game, I was standing over for the first few rounds, and I'd spot in her hand what I thought was the optimum move, and I obviously didn't, kept it guard, didn't say anything, and then she'd play a card down and it would do better, and I'd be like, okay, I guess I'm just really bad at this game. Because I felt all smug and conceited, like, oh, she's such a newbie not knowing what to play, and she would be like, which one? Oh, I don't. And then she'd play a better card than I'd spotted, and maybe it's that I decide too quickly that I found the best one, but I don't know what it is. Maybe my brain just doesn't work in that sort of spatial zone for those colours, and that's why I didn't have as much fun with it. The more I looked at it, the worse I got somehow.
Well, when we talk about who would and wouldn't enjoy the game, I think it's very important to make a clear distinction. We've been saying how, it's a card game and you have decks of cards, but this is a tile laying game.
Yeah,
for sure, yeah.
Absolutely a tile laying game. So just want to make that abundantly clear for listeners who haven't played before. If you enjoy tile laying games where you have to sort of optimize your own little puzzle, this is right up your alley. It is not a card game in any way.
It is an abstract game.
I would say if anyone has played Limes, I don't know if either of you have played Limes.
I know of Limes, I've not played it.
But that is very similar. It's a tile laying game where you're optimizing your own puzzle. And admittedly, it's all about endgame scoring, but it's very much the same kind of thing where you're rotating tiles to make sure you've got, the biggest field and the longest river. And yeah, it feels very much... It was the game that reminded me the most of Orchard, I think, just because of the whole, you're trying to optimize what you've got in your hand whilst trying to make sure you don't block yourself off for the future.
Yeah, I mean, to what extent do you guys think the game is predetermined by what's in the deck? Like the maximum score you can get this game is X because of the cards you're going to get, and you have to be lucky with the configuration of the 9 cards that you get in order to get the highest score. Or do you think that that's something that's just in the back of my mind and putting me off rather than actually a valid concern for the game?
Do you mind if I take that one, Dan?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think that's a really interesting question, Scruffy. It's not something I've actually even considered before. But when you say it like that, it reminded me of our episode when we spoke about roads and boats and how the map you choose to play on determines the maximum type of score you can get on that particular game.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, I suppose you're right, but there are only 18 cards, so I don't think it's going to be super swingy. And on top of that, because the way they come out, you kind of won't know. And I guess, is that why you have the issue, that it's not kind of honest that your score might be capped this turn because... and you're not aware of that when you're going into it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's what exactly that you aren't able to know because the number of configurations for those 18 cards must be insane.
Yeah.
And so you're not able to know what the best potential score you can get with those cards would be. Even if you had a supercomputer that could calculate, had looked at all the 9 cards in the deck that you were going to get, which is obviously information you don't have as a player. But somehow, if you got that computer to tell you what the max score you could get with those 9 cards, I think it would be different every game. But maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, possibly. If I remember correctly, though, when you were aware of the sort of maximum score you can shoot for on roads and boats, that was something that put you off. So do you not think that this is maybe a positive that it hides that information from you?
Oh, yeah, I don't think it'd be nice to know it. I just think that knowing that it exists or that it potentially exists is something that kind of is another thing that puts me off the game in a weird way, because it's like, it makes me feel like, well, I think I played as well as I could, and I probably didn't, but I feel like the game's cheating me somehow.
Dan, how do you feel about that one?
I mean, I understand where you're coming from, Scruffy, and no offense meant, but it's kind of derivative logic, because you could say that about any game, pretty much. If any game that involves a point total, there will be sort of a perfect moveset that will get you a maximum amount of points, especially in a solo game, and probably even more so because you don't have an unpredictable human element. So, well, I mean, I do get your point, and I fully respect it. I just don't agree.
No, that's fair. And I think it's only obvious to me, like, if we compare it to something, say, like Mage Knight, which has, I guess, the exact same thing, where you don't know what all the enemy tokens are going to be, or you don't know what all the cards are going to draw. But if you had a magic supercomputer, it would be able to calculate all those variables, the unknown variables even, and tell you the best score, which will be different depending on every game setup and every game layout determined as soon as you've set up and put all the tiles face down. Sure, it has the same sort of thing, but I think I notice it more in Orchard because the game is so contained within this really small playthrough. And maybe it is. Yeah, you're right. It's probably derivative. It's probably just a thing that I'm.
Well, I mean, now you explain it like that, I suppose I can see where you're coming from. It's more the fact, I suppose, that you have such limited choice.
Yeah,
that it's very easy for one thing. If you make one choice, you've halved your score, but you'd never know that. So you could play. You make one move and it seems great, and then you get to the end, and then you go, "Well, that move actually railroaded my whole."
Yeah, in Mage Knight you have more agency. You can decide whether you can react to the situations, and you can decide, okay, well, I see that I made a mistake there that I couldn't have anticipated for, but now I can do something about that. In Orchard, you play that card, like you say, and get the best score for that turn, and then draw a card and it doesn't fit and the card in your hand didn't fit, but you were hoping that maybe the card you drew would be able to fit. And so it takes away that kind of player agency, I guess is the only word for it, isn't it?
Mm.
But it is a tiny game, and so maybe that's just like nitpicking, because that's not what the game's for. It's not for giving you meaningful, interesting choices. It's for just a bit of fun, puzzly things with some nice, pleasurable feedback where you lay that card and go, oh, that was a good one. Look at all my dice jump up. But maybe that's just not for me personally.
Yeah, I'm glad that you've gone and said that, because I was about to say, like comparing Orchard to Mage Knight is very unfair on all, because one takes 3 to 4 hours and the other one takes 5 to 10 minutes, And I think that makes a lot of those things that you were just saying completely forgivable, because if that does happen, you've immediately got another deck that you can try and you'll probably score higher next time. So just give it another go. And that kind of has to be for you. You kind of have to know that that's what you're getting into, but it's not a problem for me, I don't think. But I do kind of get what you're saying. So the first few times I played Orchard, I was thinking to myself, well, what am I going to talk about on the podcast in regards to this game? What could I talk about? Because the system's so small and so tightly contained in its own little like playthrough, like you said. What can I talk about? And part of me, the hobbyist part of me said, well, I would like to see the core mechanism of covering those things up and producing more resources and more points in this case as a cog in a bigger wheel, as part of a bigger game, a core mechanic in a kind of larger system, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But then the more I played Orchard, the more I thought, well, all the things that make this good are the fact that it is so simple and it's not convoluted. It is just pure tile placement. And it makes me happy to play and look at these patterns. In episode 1, we spoke about why we play solo games. And I think we both said that it's a bit of a meditative exercise for the both of us. I think the less you have to look at the rules and the more pure and easy to understand the system is, the more meditative it becomes. I was explaining this to my dad. We went on a hike just yesterday, and he asked me what we're talking about on the next episode. And I said about how it feels like this meditative exercise. And the way I was describing it to him, I was saying, because I don't have to look at the rules, I can very much concentrate on, and because the decisions aren't extremely deep, I can just concentrate on the joy of placing a card and picking up a dice. And he said to me, that sounds a bit like a wellness exercise, just concentrate on how the card feels, how it looks, how it feels to place it on the table. And maybe I don't know, being too philosophical, but to me, yeah, when I take my hobbyist hat off and I stopped all the criticisms I had of Orchard before the episode started, I realized that I only had those criticisms retrospectively. When I then got it back to the table, I was finding that I was in a really good mood. I was happy to be playing the game. And I think, yeah, sometimes you don't have to take the game so seriously,
Yeah, that's totally valid.
Thanks.
I think I've just been really unlucky with it. Like I say, getting a less score every single time I play, as if the game's kind of like it hasn't engendered good vibes for me. I guess it's the exact same thing I had with Roads and Boats, where I didn't get a very good score and it made me feel bad. It's just my own ego getting in the way of my fun again.
It's a very interesting point, though, Norm, that you raise. It is. I mean, I fully understand what you mean about it being sort of very zen, if you like, because the less you have to refer to the rules, the more in the moment you are.
Mm-hmm.
And work has been pretty full on for me recently, and I must admit, being able to just crack this game out for 5 minutes on like a coffee break or at my lunchtime has been quite a good escape, I would say, especially considering it's only 5 minutes long. I haven't had to go for a walk or any of that kind of stuff. It's just 9 cards. I'm just going to focus on this. And then, as I mentioned before, the elation of getting the perfect fit. And then I've sort of come out of the other side just thinking, yeah, work's not that bad.
That's lovely.
Yeah, that is lovely. And although you don't have to refer to the rules a lot, because you are trying to get a good score, and because even though there aren't super deep decisions, there are still decisions to make. So you have the added bonus of, yes, you can concentrate on how the card feels in the moment, but also when you do place it, it also has a meaning within the context of the game. That this applies to all games, obviously, but I'm saying that because Orchard is so simple, that kind of feeling is amplified.
Yeah.
Dan, I'm really glad that you sort of experienced the same thing, because I was worried that when I started talking about things like mindfulness and stuff, I was worried that it was going to come across as all kind of hippy dippy kind of bullshit philosophy.
Well, no, I mean, I'll be honest, because there is the whole thing about board games and mental health.
Yeah.
We're all part of numerous communities on Facebook, and there's always people who are just like, my life is shit right now, but I'm glad that I've got board games.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I think like it is very important, like the Zen-like state that you achieve in something as simple as Orchard. The benefits are often sort of like a lot more hidden than you realize, I suppose. I mean, I'm not ashamed to say that it's sort of a year and a half ago, I basically had a massive breakdown. And so I've come to really appreciate this kind of like these moments where you're just like, yeah, brilliant. Take that, 4 trees. And you're just like, yes, I'm amazing. Those kind of things where maybe before I wouldn't really appreciate it so much. But now I'm like, actually, yeah, I'm the tits. Check me out.
And it's also a case of it's a distraction when you're just when you're not even concentrating on, am I doing well in the game? You're concentrating on what colors match what colors. It's a meditation, isn't it?
I think there's you're like, in this modern age, you're programmed to achieve stuff. And then, so I often have days where I haven't achieved anything. And I'm like, wow, shit day, But even something as simple as playing Orchard, I have achieved something. Maybe I haven't achieved the best score, but I'm still like, wow, I can do better next time. And you sort of come away just thinking, yeah, it's just that you've basically reset your brain. You were bloody miserable. You've played Orchard. Yeah, you've not achieved your best score, but you've had at least one moment where you've gone, yes. But then on the flip side, I've also had games of Orchard where I'm 3 cards in and I'm just like, this is shit. Because I realize I've screwed it up straight away. And I've got 2 cards in my hand and I can't make a good play out of them. So I'll just start again.
But you can just start again. That's
which is the beauty. Yeah, indeed. It's not like I spent 2 hours setting up Gloomhaven and I've killed, I've died straight away. And I'm like, wow, waste of my life. I'm 2 minutes into a game of Orchard and I think, no, I want to start again because I don't think this is a good start. And I can do that. All I do is pick up another deck of cards and I'm away.
Or you're 2 minutes into Orchard and you think, I'll just rush to the end. Guess what? You're only 3 minutes from the end as well. So either way, it's not that big a problem,
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, so just moving on from that, I want to ask you guys whether you think these sort of smaller print and plays like Orchard are mostly played by experienced gamers like us, because going in, I kind of realized that I've only come across these as an experienced gamer. And so I don't know if that acts as a bit of a barrier to me. Or do you think that they act as a gateway for new players to move into more heavy games, and that some people approach gaming through these? Like, obviously my partner might move on to more games now, or maybe there are people that like her will just play these smaller games and never transition into bigger stuff. So yeah, I mean, what do you guys think of that?
Dan, I think you can take this because you play a lot more sort of small footprint games and micro games than we do.
Yep.
What's your take on that?
It's a very big question for such a small topic.
Yeah, it was probably about 3 or 4 questions in one there, wasn't it? I guess we could just boil it down to who they're for. I guess. Would you say that these sorts of smaller games are designed for people who are less into heavy games, or that they're designed to encapsulate everyone, and that they're more likely to be discovered by people who have got their favorite heavy games but want to just have a nice easy break from that?
Yeah, so I think it's a very strange niche in our hobby, these micro games, because a lot of them would appeal to the less heavy gamer, because by nature a lot of these smaller games have fewer rules and far less mechanics, because there's only so much you can fit in a small box. But I think possibly, maybe I would say unfortunately, it's only going to be the people who are more into their hobby who are going to find these games.
Yeah.
I mean, Orchard, classic example, none of us had heard about it until someone on the Discord mentioned the game. I know quite a few of these small form factor games I own personally, I found through perusing Board Game Geek, which obviously your average person isn't going to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, you don't see them. You see games like typical gateway. I'm doing air quotes. Games like Catan or whatever in the shops, but you never see these small one-page print and plays, because they're often, I guess, free to play, or that they have the free to play option there. That they don't appear commercially, which is, I guess, where most people encounter board games, in a board game shop or wherever. And it's very interesting to me that isn't how people get into board games. People don't start with a tile laying game like Orchard, where it's just the bare bones basics. They start with something like Azul, which has a bit more to it.
Well, I think there's an interesting, you mentioned the sort of the commercial side of things. It's very hard to make small games not necessarily cost effective, but the
Commercially
cost
viable.
Yeah, well, not even that. It's if someone walks up and they see a Orchard, it's a box with 18 cards and 15 dice in it and a few tokens. To sort of your average person who isn't really into the hobby, they might see that and look at the cost and think, I'm not paying that. No, that's not worth that. But whereas someone who is more experienced in the gaming hobby is going to see beyond the raw fact that it's some dice and bits of cards, and see the design that's gone into it. This is a really interesting game that's going to appeal to the mechanics I like. It's hard for people to justify the costs when something like Azul, which is a great looking game, I think we can agree. They've got the printed tiles and everything. That is a game that looks like it's worth the money that it sells at.
For sure.
Yeah. It's interesting, but I think it's definitely a shame that small form factor games don't see more commercial light, because I for one love them. Not least because they fit in a drawer, and my wife can't have a go at me for taking up shelf space.
Yes. Well, if they are sort of difficult to find and get into, how did you find yourself becoming a lover of micro games, Dan? How did that come about?
So that was a matter of chance, I would say. As I mentioned earlier, there's a few people like-minded people at work. We enjoy playing board games. So we started doing kind of a Thursday lunch club. So we'd meet up on a Thursday, go down to the local coffee shop and play a game in our lunch break, which was good fun. And then I wanted to contribute to that by bringing a game of my own. And at the time, I didn't own any sort of small factor games at all. And it was actually shortly after that I found the Mint Tin Design Contest on Board Game Geek, which is, it doesn't appear like they've run one for a couple of years, but it was a yearly contest where you had to design a game that would fit in the size of a mint tin, specifically an Altoids tin, for those of you who are familiar with those mints. And then from that, one of the winners, which was Mintworks, was on Kickstarter, and I backed it. And I now have numerous games that fit in my pocket. Because for me, it's so convenient. You go to a family gathering, you go camping, you go down the pub, whatever. I've got a game I can put in my pocket. I don't need to bring a rucksack. I don't need to, have my IKEA bag full of massive heavy boxes. I've just got games that I can just chuck in a pocket. And that, I don't know, it just makes me really happy to just have these little games where I think, look at this, guys. It doesn't look like anything, but we're going to have a game for an hour and it's going to be great.
in some ways it's like a magic trick, isn't it? And if you can minimize the horrible bit of board gaming, which is learning the rules, and just dive straight into, look, here's what you do, draw a card, play a card, job done. And yeah, why not?
Yeah, I don't think any of the games I've got, the small factor ones, take more than sort of 5 minutes to explain the rules.
And for people like myself who are a nightmare to teach, I always just want to dive straight in and start playing. I'm the worst nightmare to teach. These kind of games don't suffer with that problem, not just because they take a very small amount of time to teach, but because they also take a small amount of time to play. The new player can see the whole game state from beginning to end and have a good idea of how they can plan better next time. Where some of the longer or more traditional sort of length games, an hour and a half, 2 hours, if you're not used to playing games, sometimes it's very difficult to see in that sprawling mass of time where it is you've gone wrong or what you might want to try differently next time. And I think that's another thing that makes these very, very accessible. Not that that's so much the goal of Orchard, obviously being a solo game, but I can absolutely see the appeal.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I think that's why this design choice of having 2 decks of cards and then just immediately being able to start another game in Orchard isn't just a kind of happy little design choice that makes you go, well, that's neat. I mean, it's that as well, but it's also fundamentally very important for these small games to have that kind of encouraging replayability. And I think Orchard really nails that. I think you're absolutely right. That it's not just about having a quick setup and a quick rules teach. It's also about having a quick game. So then you can get into another game and try something different and have a bit more fun with it. And Orchard really nails that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Because
with Orchard, you go, okay, well, this game, I'm just going to try and play the best cards. And then you go, well, okay, this time I'm going to try and get a bumper crop because I didn't get one last game. And then from there you go, well, this time I didn't actually use my fruit to rotting the fruit things, didn't break the rules as much as I could have. So maybe I can try playing around with that and do that early instead of late. Those sort of little calculations are fun to mess around with. And it's nice to have the game encourage you to do that.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil too much of the strategy because it is a small game. But going on to those elements that you were just talking about, how do you guys find things like, the rotten fruit? Is that something that the more you play, do you sort of bounce off of those? Are there any advanced maneuvers you guys have noticed? Or how often do they come up in your games? And how highly do you score when rotten fruit occurs?
They've come up in every game I've played. I must admit. But I only tend to use one. I'm very rarely using 2. But I'm actively fighting the temptation to not use any. Because even though, obviously, it's -3 points to use one, there's something in the back of my mind that thinks, but, they wouldn't be in the game if they weren't some sort of benefit. So, for example, you could have a card where you could match 5 of 6 things, but you need to put a token down. Even if those 5 didn't have any dice on them at the moment, you're still getting a net gain of 2 points.
Yeah,
that you wouldn't have had before. So I think there is something to them. I'm not claiming to be some sort of mastermind, but I do believe that I think by not using at least one, you're probably shooting yourself in the foot unless you've got some sort of perfect draw. But you're not going to know that because obviously there's hidden information in the cards you haven't drawn yet. So I don't think you should resist using any of them, would be my tip. But I will gladly be challenged in the Discord on that fact.
Well, I sort of first few games I was very cautious to use rotten fruit, but then when the reason I was cautious was because it doesn't just give you -3 points. You're then not able to place anything on top of it, so it limits what you can place. It was when I realized that sometimes by trying to avoid rotten fruit, you'll place things suboptimally, and therefore you may even end up putting things down that you can't then place on top of anyway, like we mentioned earlier, putting 3 of the same color in next to each other. So sometimes if you try the games where I score lowest are the games where I make a real effort not to place rotten fruit. And I found that really fascinating. And I think that's quite a nice little quirk and a nice little element of push and pull in a game that is otherwise just putting cards down.
Yeah, totally agree.
What about you, Scruffy?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask, because every time I've tried implementing strategy, I've scored worse than the first game where I put things down randomly. But specifically, I think I've been a lot more liberal with my rotten fruits the more I've played, and I'll often even put 2 down in a game. Maybe that's a problem. Maybe I'm being too ambitious, trying to get 2 bumper crops or whatever, And
I mean, to be honest, it sounds like you're possibly overthinking the game.
I always do. I mean, this is the biggest feedback I got on my Spirit Island is you're probably overthinking it, Scruffy. It's fair.
Yeah.
It's totally fair.
Because when you're playing solo, you can sit there and overthink. You're allowed to. There's no one else waiting for you to take your turn.
Exactly.
So that happens in all of these kind of games. I think, it's a trap that anyone could fall into. And I get it completely.
Yeah, but I think it's a valid play style. And I think it's just, if you're like me and you tend to overthink things, then perhaps Orchard will punish you for it, because it has me. Or maybe I've missed some things when I've been playing and not quite overthought it in the right way.
Yeah, I think though it's probably important to note that there are small form factor games that overthinking isn't a bad thing. So I know we have mentioned that small form factor games, they're generally quite simple. They don't have a lot of mechanics, but there are small form factor games out there that can be quite a head scratcher.
And encourage.
Yeah, exactly. Few spring to mind at the moment, which is nice and unhelpful. But I suppose, I say few spring to mind. There's a number that spring to mind, but it also raises an interesting question of what is small form factor?
Well, yeah.
How small is small?
That is an interesting question, because when we were, talking about doing this game, I was like, well, what other sort of micro games or small games do I own? And if you've listened to the podcast, I'm a fan of Mage Knight, I'm a fan of 18xx games. So I don't own many small games. I just don't. And I thought, well, Friday's a small game, right? But then I looked at the number of cards in a game like that and compared it to Orchard, and I went, no, they're practically a different genre, because there's so many more. I don't know, what would, from someone who plays a lot, what would you consider, a micro game or a small box game? Or
I suppose for me, it's a combination of table footprint and size of the box, because they're not necessarily related.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
For example, Orchard, tiny box, you can play it on the back of a piece of A4 paper, or as I did earlier, on the back of my work laptop. It's tiny in both senses of the word. But then you look at something possibly like what I would still call a small game I got recently, which was Tranquility. The box is very small. It's basically a small cube, but the table footprint takes up quite a lot of my table. So I would still class it small form factor because it's in a small box, but the actual, like I say, table space is quite large. The tiny epic games are also an interesting sort of grey area, because again, the boxes are small, they fit through your post box, but the footprint on some of those games can be quite large.
They're anything but tiny, aren't they? They're
exactly, yeah,
enormous, some of them.
I mean, Tiny Epic Galaxies is one of their more popular ones, but if you're playing a full sort of 5-6 player game, you're taking up quite a lot of the table.
Yeah. See, with definitions like this, I think I'm always coming at it from a weird angle, and for me, it's these sort of games are very intimately linked with print and play games, because a lot of them are print and play games, or a lot of them are small games. But I think any game that encourages you to kind of make it yourself is inevitably going to probably be smaller than a game that requires lots of components and lots of things like a Mage Knight or whatever, or any other board game. But I think the two are quite closely related, that you'll find a lot of print and plays just by the nature of them being print and plays, and to encourage players to do it rather than put them off with all the things they could have to print.
Well, I could challenge you on that point slightly.
Okay.
Because I actually know of someone put Talisman, and they reduced it and made it a game that fits into a mint tin.
Wow. But then it becomes a small game, right? I mean,
exactly.
It's not exactly. So by doing that, by reducing it, they have now made it into a small game. So they had to reduce it. And it's about reducing the component size and about reducing the tabletop impact, like you say. So I think that's a really good place to go fishing for them, is just other print and play games.
Yeah, I mean, definitely something I will probably do for Orchard is resize the card so it fits in a mint tin, so I can take it places.
Well, then you need tiny dice.
I've got some.
Nice.
So, yeah, I mean, I think you could definitely fit 15 dice in a tin. Why not? I'm sure if I try hard enough, it will work.
Plenty of spirit and perseverance.
Brilliant. So, Dan, whilst we got you here, I don't want to waste your knowledge. I wouldn't forgive myself. Can we ask what other solo small box games we should be keeping an eye out for?
Okay, so I've already mentioned Tranquility. That's quite interesting. So it's a game similar to the Mind. I'm not sure if there's a the in front.
There is.
There is. Okay, the Mind. So it's a game about placing cards sequentially. But in Tranquility, you have a grid, which basically you have to fill up in a numerical order. But the interesting thing about Tranquility is if you place a card next to another card, you have to discard the difference. So all the cards are numbered from 1 to 80. So if I was to put a 5 next to a 3, I need to discard 3 cards from my hand. So you have to be very clever with your placement, or you may end up with discarding so many cards that you can't finish the grid.
Interesting.
Which has been good fun. I was today also playing Mint Delivery, which is... So the Mint Works game I mentioned earlier, they're actually doing a series of Mint games. So I think there's 4... they've done at the moment. Mint Delivery was their second one, which is essentially a pick up and deliver game. But I got absolutely ruined by the AI that drives the game. Mostly because there's a bit in the rules which says if an AI can't carry out an action, it just sits there. And you should use that in order to beat the AI. I didn't use that in the slightest, and it doubled my score. But that was a very good game, very enjoyable. Mostly because there is a lot of, whilst you're sort of controlling the AI, a lot of it's driven, but sort of the resources you get are kind of random. So whilst you can be like, right, I'm going to make the AI take this order, because of the way you get the resources for that order, you may have actually screwed up because you'll do something and then all of a sudden the AI gets all of the resources in one turn and completes the order.
Right. It sounds like a game that would really reward thinking a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, so I suppose circling back, there's probably a game that would appeal to you, Scruffy, because there is some thinking required in that game.
Wouldn't appeal to me then. No, I'm kidding.
But yeah, there is some thinking to do with that game, and especially I shot myself in the foot a couple of times because I hadn't quite planned ahead correctly, which meant that I couldn't finish the order I had, which would have given me sort of quite a significant amount of points, because the game ends. So there's four stacks of order cards, and the game ends when 3 of those stacks empties. And I basically misplanned, which meant that the AI picked up the last card, so I didn't get my final turn, which really annoys me even now because I know exactly where I went wrong.
Nice.
So yeah, a little bit of extra thinking probably would have done me a lot better in that respect. But yeah, I mean, I think sort of vying away from sort of mint tins and card games, there's actually a game that I got was an impulse purchase in one of those random tat shops, and it's called Farkle, which is a push your luck dice game, which as a solo game is just basically quite simply trying to get the best score you can. But the game works kind of like Yahtzee. So you roll a set of dice, and then if any of the dice are scoring, you remove them, and then you roll your dice again, and then you keep basically removing dice until there's none left. But if you manage to score with all the dice, you just keep going round and round and round. So there's a push your luck element in that, do I just call it quits now? Or do I keep rolling and hope that I keep scoring, which then just makes my score bigger and bigger and bigger?
Okay.
Which again becomes, I suppose, kind of Zen-like in its own respect, because you're kind of just challenging yourself. How brave am I? But there's also a thinking aspect, because the minimum you can score is a pair. So if you've got 3 dice left, do you roll that? Because if you score a pair, you've only got 1 dice left, or 1 die left, and that means that you can't continue. Or you can roll it and hope for a triple, in which case you can keep going. So there's a very strange sort of, well, not strange, that's probably the wrong word, but yeah, there's knowing your odds basically, as it is an push your luck game. But I've had a lot of fun with that, and it plays quite well multiplayer, weirdly enough, because it's quite exciting to see how well someone else will do, or how eager someone else is to push their luck. So that's also good fun. So I suppose those are my sort of staple games at the moment. I've also got numerous ones coming on Kickstarter, which I will regale you with stories when they finally arrive.
Brilliant.
Well, that's some really awesome recommendations there, and that last one, it really makes me think of the joy of games like that know about the tactility of doing something and how fun it can be just to roll dice and just keep rolling the dice, and that's the game. That's fun. Yes.
Well, the next time we get together, I'm sure we can have a few hands.
Awesome.
No problem. That sounds like a plan.
Any other games you want to plug while we're here?
Sure. Well, yeah. So there's actually one I haven't played a lot of myself, which is a solo small form factor game from Dragon Dawn Productions, and it's called Dwarf. And you guys like dwarfs, so I thought that was quite appropriate.
Yay!
It's essentially you generate resources to then make things like jewelry in order to earn points, but at the same time you have to defend yourself against hobgoblins and dragons, and it all takes place on a 3x3 grid of cards, which changes every round, it makes planning ahead quite difficult, because you never know what, maybe your gold seam that you're aiming for will get covered up with a dragon, and then you have to defend the dragon instead of being able to forge the crown that you were looking for, which is good, great fun, I must admit. The few times I have played it, it is good.
Dwarves and Dragons, fantastic. One good thing about the Discord is we've been able to ask people on their opinions for this specific topic, and I think you've had some feedback for that, Norm, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. When we were looking at covering Orchard, because we knew that some people on our Discord and also some people who've been emailing us as well are into the game, I sort of reached out to them and said we would love to have, for once, a seasoned player of that game talk about the game rather than us two. So we've got two people who've written in their thoughts and opinions on Orchard. Both of them have a lot more plays of the game than probably the three of us put together, I would say. One of them is Cooper. You guys may remember Cooper from previous episode, and also, like I said, from the Discord. Cooper's written in plenty of times. So he said, Orchard is one of my top 20 solo games, and since receiving my Kickstarter version in February, I've played almost 40 games. So probably not more than all three of us put together, but 40 games. It's a perfect game for when you're not in the mood to set up a big or long game and still want something challenging and interesting to play. Setup's obviously extremely quick, the rule set is simple and easy to remember, but playing the game is anything but simple. And every choice you make, every card you place, matters. I also love how quick it plays, and because the deck contains 18 cards and you only play with 9, he almost always plays 2 games in succession, which is something all three of us have alluded to as a really, really great piece of design. It goes on to talk about the Kickstarter version, which has some very nice components, plastic cards and custom dice, etc. Won't spend too long on that because obviously this is a print and play special. But yeah, moving on, he compares it to other sort of similar style and similar size games like Circle the Wagon or Sprawlopolis, which Sprawlopolis is extremely popular in the solo gaming community. He goes on to say Sprawlopolis might be the heavier game, and he likes it a lot. He sometimes finds the choices are too exhausting for a quick and small card game. And that actually made me think, if you're playing a small game, surely the appeal is the simplicity. If you want to play a simple game, it needs to be simple, right? So I think Cooper makes a really, really good point there that, the simplicity or the lack of choices that we were sort of talking about earlier is rather a positive rather than a negative for the type of game he's looking to play. I asked him about sort of strategy, long-term strategy. Does the strategy change the more you play it? And he said, although the strongest strategy is just to try and match as many as you can, the more sort of familiar you are and knowing what cards there are and the patterns that they come out in, although you can't predict perfectly because you split them into 2 decks, it does help and you begin to see what you shouldn't leave yourself and the positions you shouldn't leave yourself in. So those are the opinions of a seasoned Orchard player. Anything there that gave yourself any food for thought, Scruffy?
It was interesting, that thing you mentioned about whether small games should be kind of complex or dense, and I get that. I think that perhaps it's a genre I need to set my brain to small game setting and be able to engage with them on a different level for the ones that are more simple and more relaxing, more meant for when you're burnt out and just want to throw some dice or flip some cards, lay some fruit trees on fruit trees, and just let it wash over me and not worry about the score. It's it's the exact same thing with Rows and Boats, but that's obviously a big game. Maybe that's a sort of a way of thinking that I need to get into in order to engage with these games on the level that they're intended to be engaged with. But maybe that doesn't apply to all of them. Like, what was that other one that Cooper mentioned?
Sprawlopolis.
Sprawlopolis.
Mhm.
Maybe that has an interface that's more designed for a gamer headset that I seem to be approaching these games with anyway. Who knows?
It's definitely very popular on a lot of the solo board gaming forums online. So see a lot of talk about Sprawlopolis.
I think I'm sold on the name alone.
I'm from my memory, it's a tile-laying city builder. So
I think I might have seen it actually. I've been very, very interested in that one. That might have to be our next one we look at.
Okay, so the second email I have here is from Peter. You might know Peter better as Lovelace. Previously, Peter only wrote in on Reddit, so I didn't know his name. But Peter has started emailing in, so it was nice to put a name to a username. So thanks for your input, Peter. He talks about the game and says, at first he thought it was just another one of those looking games, where you look at your orchard and at your cards and you just play what you think looks best in the moment. But with repeated plays, he's found that the decision space actually grows a lot. And he goes on to list a few sort of strategies that he's noticed as a seasoned player of the game. But later on says that he doesn't want to spoil the discovery for anyone, so I'm going to sort of skip over those. But some of the things he highlights are stuff like the push and pull with the rotten fruit, the way in which it's easier to spot patterns at the edge of your orchard, but they obviously won't score as many points. But sometimes you'll need to place lower down in order to expand your network and expand your options as well. So the whole game is this neat kind of push and pull. And it says a couple other things, but I think that kind of paraphrases what Peter's getting at, in that there's actually a lot more to the game than what you would initially think with more plays. That's definitely something that I've sort of seen. I think I've played about 12 games now, and I'm definitely starting to see I'm doing better. My last play, I just set my new high score. But yeah, Dan, I know Scruffy won't agree, but Dan, do you?
No, I think it makes sense. He sounds like I'm in the exact place he was when he started. So
Yeah,
I guess if I keep playing, I'll come back to this with a much more grounded understanding potentially of some of the strategy, and that you can approach it as a thinking game rather than just as a relaxing. What was the term he used?
a looking game. He described it as a looking game where you look and you match the patterns.
Yeah, because that's how I see it at the moment. That it's just a looking game, and because I treated it like that on my first playthrough and got my best score, that's how I feel about the game. But obviously, I have to take the veteran's word here for that. There is a lot more deep strategy. Sorry, Dan.
No, I mean, I was just going to agree. Although I'm not sure if I particularly like that. I kind of quite like the surprise. So I fear if I play it too much and, I get a strategy down and, I can predict the cards, I'm not sure I'll enjoy. I think I may be the opposite to you, Scruffy. I think I probably won't enjoy it so much.
That's really interesting.
Because, the excitement I get of getting that perfect match will just lessen if I keep doing it. And then I will consider the game, too easy from that point on, or something similar. So I quite like, I mean, as I mentioned, I quite like the fact it's quite zen. So for me, I don't think it is a game I'm going to hammer.
Yeah, so for you, it's not about getting good and getting a better score and improving your score. It's about being in the moment and experiencing the game as maybe even as a looking game, and just enjoying the rush when that happens to you as a player who's almost, I guess, passively experiencing the game. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, obviously, I do want the better score. I do want an almost impossible score, but I'm happy to enjoy the ride. I'm not in a rush to get there. I think I'm quite happy just to, surprise myself when I do better.
That feeling that you're talking about, Dan, it reminded me of when I started playing Ganz Schon Clever, or that's pretty clever. The roll and write. When you start to have those bonuses chain off of each other, I feel really clever. But then when I finish playing, I'm like, well, I'm sure if I just rolled the dice, like they would naturally chain together anyway, But yeah, I feel like Orchard is the same. Sometimes you feel very clever when you can match, 4 or 5 with some rotten fruit, and you feel like that's a clever piece of strategy. And actually, sometimes maybe anyone could have seen that, but it doesn't matter. It's just fun to experience. I agree. I do agree.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you for writing that, Peter. That was really, really interesting.
Yeah, thank you to the pair of you. And it's something really cool that now that we have more people on the Discord, that we're able to do stuff like that and reach out to you guys prior to the show as well as after the fact as well. So that's pretty cool. That's probably a really good segue into the next portion of the show, which is where we respond to the emails, letters, and direct messages that we've received from you guys, the listeners.
Yep.
Before we do that, Scruffy, what's the question for this episode?
So the question for this episode is: are there any games that get you into a more zen-like flow, like we talked about earlier in the episode, or games where you don't need to have as much control over and are happy to let the flow around you?
Yeah, that's interesting, because if you asked me before playing Orchard if I'd like a game like this, I probably, if I'm honest, would have said no. Games for me, they have to have a high level of, at least I thought, I had this preconception, the games had to have this really high level of agency, and I like a big sprawling mess of components across my table, So yeah, it's interesting, and I'd be very interested to see what other games give you a similar feeling, because like Dan was saying earlier, in today's day and age, I think this type of game is more than welcome in my collection.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And it's why I don't think I liked Friday the first time I played it, because that was how I kind of felt that game was, that it was just sort of arbitrary choices and you just do it. And I think if I played Friday on an easier mode now than the hardest difficulty, it would be like that. And I would probably be able to engage with it on that way of just letting it flow and just drawing the cards and picking whichever one I fancy. And it's very instant gratification-y in that way. But obviously, the more I played it, like I said in our Friday episode, the harder it got, and a lot more thinky than I first expected. So,
Brilliant.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how I'd answer that question myself, but it'd be interesting to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Absolutely. Great. So let's have a look at the responses we got from the last episode, shall we?
Fantastic.
Excellent. So the first email we received was from Eduardo. Eduardo wrote in and said, "Let me first congratulate you for the really good podcast. I'm really not a podcast listener kind of person, but now I went and installed the app to listen to the one about Iron Swan, and I'll keep listening. Iron Swan was why I came to listen. It is my favorite role-playing game, but he also loves board games as well. And actually has a few good ones to play solo as well. He notes his favourite solo games are Robinson Crusoe, which he guesses as a role player, what appeals to him there is that it's similar to a role-playing game in that you get a story out of Robinson Crusoe by the time you're done with it. Now for the questions. So if you remember, the question we asked were, what are the potential barriers to entry for solo role-playing games? And also, what solo role-playing game systems we should try next. So for the first one, he says, it's like what you were saying in the podcast. It first feels daunting to think about how much work is needed to make and have a good story and an interesting and rich world with fun characters. But in reality, it comes naturally from playing, like we said in the episode. Iron Sworn is actually a good way to start, not only because it gives a good structure, but it gives a hand at how to handle the story. And I think that's exactly what we were getting at in the episode, wasn't it, Scruffy?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was so clever at doing that. In regards to what we should play next, he said, well, if you got into Iron Sworn, I would extremely recommend Iron Sworn Delve, which is a paid expansion. It makes it even bigger with more options to create enemies and actions, more world building, and delving sites as well. So more tables and more interesting ways to modify more things as well. So he also points out that in the future, Sean Tomkin, who is the creator of Iron Sworn, is going to release Starforge, which is essentially Iron Sworn in space, which I know, Dan, you're pretty excited for that one. Am I right?
Yeah, I'm quite excited for that. I'm far more into the sci-fi side of things than fantasy, so I'm definitely looking forward to that one.
Brilliant. He said one other solo role-playing game that he would recommend would be Scarlet Heroes, which is by Kevin Crawford. It gives more of a mechanical rulesy game, and it can be played with things like minis, but it also can be played narratively as well in a similar way to Iron Sworn, so that's quite interesting. He also recommends a game called A Quiet Year, which it has more sort of board game feel. This one can be played solo, but loses some of the fun that way. Another one he recommends is 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. And this is a card deck system that prompts you to carry on the story, which I think is one that Joe in our Discord recommended for us. I don't know if you remember that one, Scruffy, at all?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. So I think if I was to choose right now which one I'd like to try next, I think I've got my eyes on 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. I think that sounds really, really interesting. But yeah, thank you so much for writing in, Eduardo. That was a really, really awesome letter.
Yeah, that is a lot to respond to. That's wow, what an amazing load of suggestions. I've already tried A Quiet Year, not solo, but with my partner. Probably want to talk about that at some point in the podcast. I definitely intend to play a lot more Iron Sworn. I didn't know about Delve. I will almost definitely be getting that, I'm sure. Actually, I don't know if you guys who are listening would be interested in this at all, but both me and Norm have started doing Twitch streams of Iron Sworn now as well. So if anyone's kind of wanting to see it played multiplayer, then we'll probably be doing some more of them. And I'm also thinking about setting up a solo one of them as well. So that's something fun to watch out for. We'll put a link to my Twitch in the description where that will be going on. And obviously, if you join the Discord, you'll be able to hear us announce when we're doing. We've only done one so far, and it was very impromptu and fun, and it was a pretty fun little session. The first video we did is up to watch on the Twitch thing if you want to watch it anytime. But yeah, it's it's a whole new exciting world. I'm really excited to look at all those other recommendations you said. Norm said, we'll be having a look at the vampire one that was recommended by Joe as well in our Discord. So hooray! Fun times.
And yeah, another reason to join the Discord, because like you said, you get notifications of when we'll be going live, and you can join in the chat on that one.
And see our beautiful faces.
That is not a reason to join the Discord.
For the Twitch streams.
So the next email was from Paul. Paul said, "Hi guys, I've just listened to your take on Iron Sworn and have to agree with all the points you made. This is a fantastic solo game, and it really gets the imagination flowing." He found our podcast via the Iron Sworn Reddit. You're welcome. And listened to one of the earlier shows about Mage Knight, which is another great game. And he enjoyed both episodes very much. So he's gone ahead and subscribed, and we'll have to catch up on all the other shows. So he says, although you have to pay for Delve, it's an add-on to Iron Sworn, and he goes on at this point and says pretty much the same thing Eduardo says, that's very worth us investing into Ironsworn Delve, which is the expansion. Okay, he also recommends that we try Mythic. He says he started playing this long before Ironsworn, and it's another favourite solo RPG. Mythic works on asking questions like, do the monsters hear you? You roll on an odds table using things like stealth of the heroes and the surrounding noises, for instance, and you get either a yes or a no. He says, I'm not doing the game justice, as there is a lot more to it than that, but it's well worth checking out. There is a Google Docs add-on, which is free, but you would still need the rules to understand what's happening. He says that when he plays, he writes out the story and then rolls for the outcomes, etc. So that sounds very similar to how we went ahead and played Ironsworn. In answer to your question about your podcast, personally, I enjoy listening to anything about solo play, whether it's RPG or board games. It's all interesting and can lead to something new. Being a solo player myself, I'm glad I discovered your podcast and looking forward to catching up with the past and future podcasts. Great show. Thank you. No, thank you, Paul. That's a really, really kind letter.
Yes, thank you, Paul. And Mythic is definitely a classic that a lot of people talk about. And I think a lot of other systems use very similar things. I know Ironsworn's Oracle has kind of some similarities to it, but it is obviously very different from what I've heard anyway. I haven't actually played Mythic yet, and we'll have to give it a try for sure. Thank you for the tip.
Excellent. This is probably the first time I'm going to say this, but we've had so many responses from last episode, I don't think we'll be able to read all of them. So I'm going to do one more, which is from Peter, who also wrote in about Orchard. And then if we have time in the next episode, I'll be more than happy to revisit some of the ones we got from the Ironsworn one there. Are you happy with that, Scruffy? Is that okay?
That's great. Yeah. Sorry to everyone we can't get to today. It's lovely that so many of you responded. And Norm will probably tell me all about them outside of the podcast. So you will be heard.
Excellent. And I read everyone who writes in. So yeah, apologies we can't get through everyone today. Okay, so Peter said, hi, I tried Legacy of Dragonholt and I liked it at the beginning because I think it was you who mentioned that game in the last episode. Is that right, Scruffy?
That's right, yep.
But it felt more like reading a book than playing a game. And he thinks solo RPGs will have a similar feeling. What he really likes in solo games is exploration and mystery through optimization. So easily fall into a flow state where, bang on topic, easily fall into a flow state when you play a game and they like to solve the problem. In solo RPGs, we spoke about how failure made the story more interesting. And you know from video role-playing games that optimizing your character and their progression isn't the best. So a story of success is often boring, and it's more interesting to create problems and to solve problems. And he thinks that that's probably the reason why thematic games and role-playing games isn't for him. It makes perfect sense, I think.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of the fun for RPGs for me personally, I know there's a whole other school of RPers who like to make the best character and the character that can just solve every single problem and win in every situation and mechanically sort of almost break the rules so that they can do amazing feats and be best and win every time. But for me, that's really, really, really boring. And I much prefer just getting into scrapes, having obstacles that maybe my character can't even overcome. And then he has to find an alternate route. And it's in that alternate route for me that the adventure really happens. I think that a lot of our peers are like-minded in that sense. And yeah, that's just my way of playing RPs.
Different hobbies entirely, aren't they, really? I mean, there's a lot of crossover, but if you like one, you're not guaranteed to like the other. If you're a Eurogamer, you're not guaranteed to appreciate role-playing games, and vice versa, I think.
Yeah.
He does go on to say, and with respect to sleeves, which was actually the only comment we got in regards to sleeves that was, emailed into our official email. So I thought that was quite good. Yeah, he says, I mostly do not sleeve to protect games, but to make the shuffling way easier and just better, more efficient. And he said, please try to play Onirim without sleeves. You might change your mind. Yeah, interesting. I actually find it easier to shuffle without sleeves because I'm quite happy to riffle my cards. But yeah, maybe that's just me, and probably turn off a lot of subscribers right then.
Yeah, riffling all the way. And we've got a guest on today who can tell us officially whether you should sleeve your cards. Dan, over to you.
Decline to comment. Well, no, I'm not. I don't normally sleeve. I have sleeved games which have certain value. So, for example, as I mentioned before, one of the first games I ever got was Discworld, which is now out of print. So the first thing I did when that went out of print was sleeve the cards because I like to protect the game. But as standard, I don't normally sleeve cards. I just can't be bothered to sleeve them. It's a lot of effort. But in defense of sleeves, and Norm, I'll call you out on this, I know you use them because your copy of Orchard is in sleeves.
Well, yes, that is true. But that is because the cards are just paper.
I'm just saying they have their uses.
They do.
That's all.
They do have their uses. Wow, I've been called out. Yeah.
For print and plays, you can sleeve.
Yeah. Okay, good. I think we found a common ground. I think we can placate everyone, and we'll say no more about it.
But for all your other cards, you must not sleeve them and riffle them every day.
Future generations will look back and say that this is the start of the decline of Always Play One. They just found this random hill to die on about whether you should or shouldn't sleeve cards.
Just when people started listening and we got a huge following starting to happen, that's when we just put everyone off.
We were like, oh, thank you so much for listening. You're all wrong.
Alienate your audience 101.
I'm willing to die on.
Let's wrap this up before we lose any more listeners. Scruffy, what was the question for this episode?
So just to reiterate, the question this episode is, are there any games that get you into a more zen flow, like we talked about earlier in the episode, where you don't need to have as much control over the game and are happy to let it flow around you?
Brilliant. As always, you can reach out by email. Our email address is alwaysplayer1podcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram @alwaysplayer1podcast. We're on Facebook. Links to that are in the description. If you would like to join us on Discord and reach out that way, then please feel free to join in the conversation. Just click the link in the description and you should be invited in. As always, if you would like to support the show, we are on Patreon. It's patreon.com/alwaysplayer1podcast. Again, the links to that are in the description. I think that's everything for this episode. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. I've had a fantastic time.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, it's been awesome having you on, Dan. Thank you for being such an amazing guest and all your very insightful thoughts for this episode. And thank you guys for listening.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the show, don't forget to check out our Patreon page. The links to that are in the description. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Always Player One. Until then, reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or by email to keep the conversation going.
Please put that bit in.